If I identified 4 disruptive behaviors to get you out of your own way and get you from avoidance to awareness, would you take me up on that action that would need to take place? Welcome to another conversation of Unwrapping Courage, a gift for your soul this season. I am excited that you are here. And if you are new to this conversation, again, welcome. My name is Jaleesa Dallas. I am an author, coach, and consultant, and I help individuals and organizations cultivate courage. So what this looks like is I help them break barriers to their success, bolster their belief for greater confidence, and build courageous behavior to optimize their life. And ultimately, that helps them to create belonging internally and in community. So thank you again for joining me. Excited that you are here. And if you can do me a favor, go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, and share this with someone who you think would benefit from this conversation. Also, be sure to download our complimentary resource, and you can get that resource to follow along with us on this journey of 25 days of soul work at www.gobravellc.com. Again, that's www.gobravellc.com. So again, thank you for joining me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation about getting out of our own way and these 4 destructive behaviors that keep us essentially stuck and stagnant. And so the reason why I thought this conversation would be important to have over this series is because, again, we're working on getting from avoidance to awareness. And if we're constantly going to be in a state of avoidance, we're constantly going to feel like we're stuck and we're stagnant. This conversation is important because fulfillment of our purpose depends on it. We have to break free from these destructive behaviors because we are delaying the progression, we're delaying the momentum for which God has designed for us to maximize, optimize our lives. Number 2, why it's important is because our inaction is actually a distraction to others. When we're not in place, when we're not in position, when we're not being, doing, and having what God has called us to have and do and be, then we're just in the way. We are keeping others from reaching the fullness of their calling because we're not being who we're supposed to be, and thus in the way of them getting to their next. They may be called to our voice, but when we are distracted and are letting ourselves be overwhelmed by destructive behaviors, then how will they move forward? They're depending on us to get them to a place of freedom in their own lives. And then another reason why this is important is because it allows God to lead. Oftentimes we'll put a whole lot of trust in ourselves or a whole lot of trust in our situations, but not enough in God. And He wants us to acknowledge Him and to trust Him because that is the better way. That is the best way for us to live life well and to do life well. So in this conversation, I want to help you identify destructive and self-sabotaging behaviors so that you can gain greater awareness. And I know we've been talking about self-awareness, but that's a big part of this process because if we are in places of denial, how can we be aware? And if we are aware and not keeping ourselves accountable to that awareness to do something about it, then there's something wrong. So let's get into it. The first one is disorganization. Yes, believe it or not, disorganization is a destructive and self-sabotaging behavior. And I know we can say, well, your organization is not like my organization. Yeah, we can say that, but I think there is generally a standard. So in other words, disorganization is not properly planning or controlling what's actually in our capacity to control. Disorganization can make us feel overwhelmed, and then later we decide to tackle it and not being successful along the way. And then we don't make time for it. And we justify it by saying, well, I know where everything is. We could be living in a whole lot of mess and technically know where everything is. But when it comes to, let's just say, an emergency or we have to act quickly, we end up having to search for things that should have had a place for it to be. Now, I'm not saying you have to label everything in your house or have all your papers in a file. I'm not saying all that. But there should be some organization into how you go about life. If there was an emergency, do you know where your keys are? If there's an emergency, do you know where your important papers are to where if you have to leave, you could do so quickly? That's all I'm saying. So, have you wondered why you experience brain fog and or your mind seems like it's on a hamster wheel going nonstop? There might be a whole lot of disorganization going on in there. And there is a way to manage our minds, to master our minds. I'm not going to say we can control it and that sometimes our minds have a mind of its own, but we can manage it. We can choose to think certain thoughts. Though the enemy tries to influence, we have the ultimate decision on what to think and how we think about a certain thing. So that gives us the ability to manage our minds. Another thing, have you ever felt like you're out of control? This is as a result of disorganization. And so keep that in mind as you consider getting organized. And then what if you became incapacitated? Do your family, do your friends know where things are in your home so that if they needed to get it for emergency's sake, they would have easy access to it? Or is it just randomly stuffed in a drawer or somewhere in the attic and you have no idea? That's a big part about getting organized, not so much for your sake, but for the people who are in your immediate circle to be able to access things if they need to on your behalf. And then organization creates systems for us. That is the benefit of being more organized and more planned and more controlled over the areas that we can control. It gives us a system and it increases our focus and intention on what's important. A lot of times disorganization becomes distraction, which keeps us from flowing in the things of God more easily and more readily. So number 2, doubt. And for us women, doubt can look like imposter syndrome, and specifically where you feel phony and eventually that someone will find you out. It is what I call in my book both self and systemic sabotage. It's where, again, we get in our own way and then we allow the perceptions and the powers externally in our workplaces and in our communities to make certain decisions about how we show up in the world. Now, granted, some of that we cannot control, but the parts that we can, we should. But of course, when we doubt and when we think of ourselves as less than or not enough, it becomes difficult. But it is over for us doubting ourselves. I know sometimes easier said than done, especially when we've been around ourselves long enough where doubting is second nature. It's our innate way of thinking, but we have to change that narrative in our lives. And I want you to consider some questions. In what role does doubt show up in your life? And pinpoint that. Ask yourself why, and think about what got you into that role. It had to be your strengths. It had to be your personality. It had to be who God created you to be. So why are we doubting? And then another question to consider, what would happen if someone, quote unquote, found you out? What exactly would they find? That you're a hard worker, that you're dedicated to your role and to your family and to your community? No, they might find me in pajamas all day, but outside of that, I am dedicated to what I am doing. So being found out while also being in position, self-doubt has to leave. Number 3, overcommitment. Yeah, this is one of those ones for me. And I shared these because all of that I've shared thus far, and the last one I'm going to share in just a moment, occasionally pops up in my life, and I have to be able to nip it in the bud. And so it's doing more than you're capable. It's us disregarding our capacity. And I had to learn that the hard way. When I overcommitted myself, I put all the responsibility on me, meaning I didn't seek God's counsel when I overcommitted, meaning I had to be able to steward, to cultivate, to build up, and to put all the work in making something work. Whereas if I had leaned into the capacity of the Holy Spirit or had sought God's consultation, I wouldn't have to carry such a heavy load because a lot of it would be placed on God to help me to execute and to help me to deliver. But when I overcommitted, I didn't have the capacity to do the things that I had set myself up to do. And I became, which is the fourth one, burnt out. But before we get to burnout, I want to ask you a few questions and share just a few more things about overcommitment. Overcommitment is like a form of neglect. We end up finding ourselves in error because we're trying to tackle so much all at one time. We spend more time, but we get less done. So here's a few questions that I want you to consider. In what ways can you ask for help? I was a part of an organization, a nonprofit, some years ago, and their slogan was, asking for help is a sign of strength. Again, asking for help is a sign of strength. How can you ask for help, or how can you delegate some of the responsibilities that you have committed to, even if they're overcommitments? What do you need to put down or set aside in order for you to actually be successful and thrive in your life? Another question to consider is, what are the boundaries that you put in place or haven't put in place for better self-care? And I mentioned to you on day 9 about the internal locus of control, and essentially what that is for us to create boundaries around what we can and cannot control. So if you haven't watched that video, go ahead and do that. That's day 9. But think about what is within your boundaries to control and only committing to those areas, okay? And then the last thing, as I've already alluded to, burnout. That's when we have physical and emotional exhaustion, feeling less accomplished, and essentially having a loss of identity. We have no motivation, we have no drive, and not to mention no discipline when we come to a place of exhaustion. We grow angry and frustrated and end up being apathetic when it comes to life, business, family, all the things. And so 2 questions for you to consider. What would happen if you prioritize rest? I have talked to you all, whether you're part of my email subscribing list or via this conversation that we're having now, about rest. Rest is a major part of us experiencing the peace of God and the grace of God. So how are you incorporating rest in your life? And then lastly, are you communicating your needs effectively? Are you speaking to your spouse, to your children, to your community, even to your employer, or considering your needs when it comes to your development of your business? What do you need in order to be successful? What do you need, again, in order to thrive? So I wonder if you caught everything that I just shared. All of these behaviors essentially are intersected in some way. It's like being on a trampoline. Instead of jumping, you're actually sitting down and someone else is jumping around you. Believe me, it hurts over time. At first it's like, oh, laughable, but then your body is like uncontrollably bouncing. It starts to hurt. You get knocked in different places. That's what all of these areas contribute to your life when we don't address them, when we avoid them, and we don't get to a place of taking that awareness of those things existing in our lives and actually doing something about it. So I hope that you would consider this as a type of accountability to get you moving from avoidance to awareness and actually doing something about these areas of disorganization, doubt, overcommitment, and burnout. So thank you for joining me for our conversation, Unwrapping Courage, a Gift for Your Soul this season, 25 days of soul work. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And until next time, let your soul work be your best work to a better you. Later.